Hello guys, we are BERO Games and this is a devlog for a new game called Mission Drift.
I'm Robin,
And I'm Benny.
and in this devlog we'll tell you how we made a drifting game with only one mouse input. On that note, let us start with the idea. The idea for this game originally came from the WoW 3.0 game jam in February 2021. The theme of the jam was Failure is Progress. The jam only lasted for 3 days. It was the shortest we ever entered at this point. We had many ideas. The first idea was to make a roguelike where the loss of lives grants you a damage boost. The second approach was to make a bullet hell game with the goal of running into as many bullets as possible. But we thought this idea would have been too repetitive. Overthinking the game idea in the game jam is never a good idea, but we still kept thinking for a bit. Usually it takes us around an hour to discuss some ideas and then settle on the best one. We also thought about having an overpowered character who wants to die but can't because he's simply too good. It seemed fun at first, but we realized it would have been too hard to make in such a short amount of time. The idea we went with in the end was a racing game, where you need to damage the car of a person you really hate. In most racing games, a crash would mean a failure or a time loss, but here it is progress. It seemed relatively easy to make, so we rolled with it. You never want to overscope on the game jam, but you always end up doing it. And so, of course, we did. The plan was to develop the story of this game some more, maybe some cutscenes if we had the time. Of course, we didn't get around to implement too many story elements, but at least the idea was there. We opened up a new Unity project, hooked it up with Collab so we could work together, and got started.
Movement. The most important aspect of a driving game is movement. For it to stand out, it has to be either unique or really good. Take Celeste as an example. The movement is just perfect. Or think of Getting Over It. Its movement is unique to say the least. The first approach for making a car move was in 2D, W being forward and A and D for steering. I got the controls to work kind of, but it felt way too boring. At this point the game didn't have any physics, neither did it have a drifting mechanic. When I tried coding in drifting, I ran into a bug with quaternions, basically Unity's way of handling rotation, so I finally switched over to 3D. I also wanted to make the controls feel a bit more unique. This was achieved by only having the input of a mouse. The movement in Mission Drift works by applying a force in the direction of the car, and at the same time rotating it to the cursor. If the car is not moving, it just slowly rotates to face the cursor, and when it's moving and rotating at the same time, it's drifting. The controls feel responsive enough to give the player the feeling of drifting, but not too over-responsive. There is always a small time gap before the turn, where the player should start the drift, just like in real-life drifting. 3D assets. I knew this was going to be a challenge, because I've never made a 3D game before. The most important asset of the game was a car model. I'm familiar with the basic interface of Blender, but have never made any projects besides some low poly modeling and the donut tutorial Flump and the Guru. Mission Drift will of course be low poly too. Going for a hyper-realistic look in a game jam would be way too overscoped, not speaking of my lack of knowledge of creating high poly models. There's an excellent low poly car tutorial for Blender on YouTube which I used as a reference, and the end result turned out great. It took me longer than expected to complete, but I'm proud, as it is my first model where I didn't follow the tutorial step by step and only used it for general directions and advice. The next task was to make a map for the player. First, I designed an abstract map in 2D and later made it 3D. It was a simple but tedious task. After a bit more than an hour, the map was finally done. We decided to give the map a red color to go with the orange car and the white ground.
With that being said, let's talk about the gameplay. Mission Drift didn't have any real gameplay yet, so we needed some things the player could crash into. We tried using different things like diamonds, but that didn't make any sense. Why should someone destroy them? Most players will see diamonds more as collectibles. But in this game you're not supposed to collect stuff, rather crash into it. Giving the player points for driving into walls seemed weird too, and the speedy flow of the game suffered a lot, because the walls slowed you down substantially. I made some boxes the player can destroy while drifting. In my opinion, this fits the story and the gameplay way better. To give the game some variety, I made some game modes for the player to choose from. There is 1 minute, where the player has 1 minute to crash into as many boxes as possible. Another one counts how often you have crashed in the last minute. There's also one game mode where you must crash into all boxes as fast as possible. And finally, I made a game mode for real pros, where you need to destroy all boxes without hitting any walls. It was important to us to give the game an arcadey feeling too. So, I decided to also add a game mode where the player can learn to drift or just enjoy the game without any timers or restrictions.
Polish. It was the last day and the game was basically done, with only a few hours left. It was missing some final touches and polish. The most important of all is to make crashing into boxes more satisfying. Until now they just get deactivated when the player crashes into them. I made a second box model in Blender, which consists of many pieces, to make the effect of a destroyed box. When the player crashes, I just switch the normal box to the scatters, and then give each scatter the velocity of the player to make them flying off. Making the box pieces flying off made the game feel so much better. I wanted to make some particles too. I have used Unity's particle system before, but I'm not good enough to make an explosion effect. The one I used is from an asset pack, and it fits the game quite well. The third part of making the crash satisfying is sound design. The car sound added quickly made everything come together nicely. This is enough polish, considering the 2 hours left on the clock.
Being done with that, we just needed to finish the game. I made a song for the game in Beatbox, imported it, and threw together a quick menu for the game. It just has a button for the story, some credits, and a start button. In other words, a normal game jam menu. I took some screenshots and set up an itch.io page in the colors of the game. The game is currently out on Android. Links to all of our games are in the description. We decided to call it Mission Drift Classic because it is the very first iteration of the game. In our opinion, it is quite nice, considering it was made for a game jam, but we've got something way better in the workings.
Here's a small sneak peek for the next devlog. Please leave any feedback you have in the comments. Until then, thanks for watching and see you in our next video. Bye!